Pressure has a way of revealing purpose. Scarcity has a way of awakening faith. There was a season when my bank account spoke louder than my prayers, when numbers mocked my confession and bills preached sermons of fear every single morning. Yet somewhere between the anxiety and the unanswered questions, God began a quiet work that would eventually rewrite my story. Not overnight, not magically, but deliberately. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about shortcuts. This is a testimony of alignment, how God reshapes a mindset before he releases a miracle, how he trains the heart before he transfers wealth, and how he makes a person capable of carrying what once would have destroyed them. I did not wake up one day rich. I woke up one day awakened. There is a difference. God never begins with money. He begins with vision. He never starts with abundance. He starts with clarity. Before my hands touched millions, my mind had to be delivered from poverty thinking. I realized that many people pray for provision, but secretly fear responsibility. They want increase without discipline, blessing without stewardship, overflow without obedience. God saw that in me and refused to promote me until he could trust me. That delay was not denial, it was development. Before God ever releases money into a person's hands, he releases truth into their mind. This is the part of the journey many people overlook, yet it is the foundation of every lasting breakthrough. We often ask God to change our situation, but God is more interested in changing our perception. Because as long as the mind remains confined, whatever enters the hands will eventually leak away. God understands that money is not the root problem nor the ultimate solution. The real battlefield is the way a person thinks, believes, and interprets life. Poverty mindset is not defined by how much money someone has, but by how they relate to money. It is possible to earn more and still think small. It is possible to receive increase and still live in fear. God addresses this first because fear-driven thinking sabotages abundance. When the mind is trained to expect lack, it unconsciously makes decisions that protect scarcity rather than pursue growth. God begins the work of prosperity by dismantling the inner limitations that quietly shape outward results. This mental transformation often starts in uncomfortable places. God allows moments where resources feel tight, not to punish, but to expose dependency. In those moments, every thought is magnified. Anxiety speaks louder, doubt becomes persuasive, and fear tries to dominate. But this is exactly where God begins to rewire thinking. He teaches the heart to trust his provision instead of visible resources. He trains the mind to see opportunity where it once only saw obstacles. In scarcity, God is not revealing weakness. He is building wisdom. As the mind changes, vision expands. God challenges limited prayers that only ask for survival. He pushes the heart beyond daily needs into long-term purpose. The question shifts from how will I make it to why am I here? This shift is crucial because money responds to vision. When a person begins to think in terms of value, service, and impact, resources naturally align with that perspective. God does not finance comfort. He funds purpose. But purpose cannot be carried by a small, fearful, or undeveloped mind. God also confronts beliefs that were formed through past failure, upbringing, or environment. Many people unknowingly inherit financial limitations through words they heard growing up or experiences that taught them to expect less. God patiently uproots those lies. He replaces them with truth, reminding the heart that provision flows from him, not from economy, background, or connections. When the mind aligns with divine truth, confidence replaces fear and clarity replaces confusion. This process requires intentional cooperation. God provides revelation, but transformation requires discipline. Old habits must be questioned. Impulsive spending, avoidance of responsibility, and fear of growth are challenged. God begins to teach stewardship, not just generosity. He reveals that money obeys structure. A renewed mind respects order, plans wisely, and thinks long-term. Without this mental discipline, abundance becomes dangerous rather than beneficial. As thinking matures, faith becomes practical. Faith is no longer just confession, it becomes decision-making. The renewed mind understands that faith and responsibility work together. God never blesses irresponsibility. He blesses wisdom. When the mind is trained to see money as a tool rather than a source of identity, pressure is removed. Peace is no longer dependent on balance, and confidence is no longer tied to numbers. This emotional stability is critical because unstable emotions lead to unstable finances. Eventually, opportunities begin to appear differently. What once looked intimidating now looks achievable. What once seemed impossible now feels accessible. This is not because circumstances have suddenly changed, but because perception has. God does not always move the mountain immediately. Sometimes he strengthens the climber. When the mind grows, capacity increases. And when capacity increases, increase follows naturally. The reason God begins with the mind is simple. Whatever controls the mind controls the future. If fear controls the mind, money will always be a struggle. If faith controls the mind, money becomes a servant rather than a master. God is committed to long-term transformation, not short-term gain. He knows that wealth without a renewed mind leads to destruction, but a renewed mind inevitably leads to sustainable abundance. So when it feels like God is taking too long, when the breakthrough seems delayed, it is often because he is doing a deeper work. He is aligning thoughts, correcting beliefs, and expanding vision. This inner renovation is not visible, but it is powerful. And once the mind is ready, the resources follow with precision. God does not rush this process because when the mind is prepared, the blessing will not only arrive, it will remain. Waiting seasons often feel like silence, but in God's economy, waiting is rarely empty. What we label as delay is usually divine preparation working beneath the surface. God does not withhold blessings out of reluctance. He withholds them out of responsibility. He understands that timing is as important as provision. Receiving something too early can be more destructive than never receiving it at all. That is why what feels like denial is often development in disguise. During seasons of delay, God focuses on building what cannot be bought: character, endurance, discipline, and trust. These qualities are forged slowly, often in environments where results are not immediate. When prayers seem unanswered and progress feels stalled, God is shaping internal strength. He knows that success without maturity creates pressure that can crush a person's faith. Delay gives room for roots to grow deep enough to support future fruit. One of the most difficult lessons in waiting is learning obedience without visible reward. God often asks for faithfulness when outcomes are unclear. This tests motives. Are we pursuing God for his purpose or merely for his provision? In delayed seasons, God reveals the heart. He exposes impatience, entitlement, and hidden pride. These revelations are not meant to shame, but to refine. What God reveals, he intends to heal. Delay also teaches discipline. When progress is slow, shortcuts become tempting. Many people compromise integrity because they believe speed is more valuable than substance. God refuses to promote haste over holiness. He allows delay to teach restraint, consistency, and focus. These disciplines become safeguards when abundance finally arrives. Without them, increase becomes unstable and fleeting. Another purpose of delay is dependency. When resources are limited, the soul is forced to rely on God rather than on ability or connections. This reliance deepens relationship. Trust becomes experiential rather than theoretical. Faith moves from belief to lifestyle. God desires partnership, not independence. Delay teaches the heart to consult him, listen carefully, and obey precisely. That intimacy becomes the guiding force in future decisions. Waiting seasons also reshape identity. When accomplishments are few and recognition is absent, self-worth is tested. God uses this space to separate identity from outcomes. He teaches that value does not come from success, but from calling. When identity is rooted in him, success cannot inflate ego, and failure cannot destroy confidence. This stability is essential for longevity. Many assume delay means God has forgotten them. In truth, delay often means God is watching closely. He observes how we treat small opportunities, how we steward limited resources, and how we respond to frustration. These observations determine readiness for promotion. God promotes people who are faithful in obscurity because obscurity reveals authenticity. As time passes, perspective begins to shift. The waiting that once felt painful starts to feel purposeful. Lessons accumulate, wisdom deepens, discernment sharpens. What once would have overwhelmed now feels manageable. God ends yours that when doors finally open, the person stepping through them is not the same person who first knocked. Growth has occurred. Delay also aligns timing with purpose. God sees the whole picture, the right people, the right moment, the right environment. Premature success can place someone in rooms they are not ready to navigate. Delay synchronizes preparation with opportunity so that when success arrives, it is sustainable. God is not interested in quick wins that end in collapse. When the breakthrough finally comes, it rarely feels rushed. It feels right. There is peace in the progress. Confidence replaces desperation. The blessing no longer feels heavy because the shoulders carrying it have been strengthened. This is the fruit of development. Delay has done its work. Understanding delay as development changes everything. It replaces frustration with focus and impatience with expectation. It allows trust to grow where doubt once lived. God's timing is never random, it is precise. Every waiting season is an investment into future stability. What feels slow today is ensuring strength tomorrow. When the promotion comes, it will not only elevate status, it will confirm that the process was necessary, purposeful, and perfectly timed. Obedience is the language God responds to most clearly. It is not loud, dramatic, or always visible, but it carries weight in the spiritual realm. While effort, talent, and intelligence have their place, obedience is what unlocks divine movement. God does not advance people because they are gifted. He advances them because they are willing to follow his instructions, even when those instructions challenge logic, comfort, and personal preference. True obedience is tested when understanding is absent. God often gives direction without explanation, not to confuse, but to build trust. If he explained every step, faith would become unnecessary. Obedience requires surrendering the need to control outcomes. It demands humility, the willingness to say yes without seeing the full picture. This is why obedience becomes a form of currency in heaven. It signals alignment, submission, and trust, qualities God can safely reward. Many people want God's blessing but resist God's process. They prefer agreement over obedience, yet agreement is easy when conditions are favorable. Obedience proves loyalty when conditions are uncomfortable. God watches how people respond when his instructions stretch them beyond convenience. He observes whether obedience is conditional or consistent. Consistent obedience is rare, and that rarity makes it powerful. Obedience also reveals priorities. When God asks for something that threatens comfort or security, the response exposes what truly matters, whether it is giving when resources are limited, walking away from familiar environments, or stepping into unfamiliar territory. Obedience demands sacrifice. That sacrifice is never wasted. What is surrendered in obedience returns multiplied in purpose. God does not take to deprive, he takes to reposition. In moments of obedience, God often remains silent. There is no immediate confirmation, no visible reward. This silence is intentional. It separates those who obey for applause from those who obey out of trust. Obedience without affirmation builds resilience. It anchors faith internally rather than externally. When reward eventually arrives, it does not become the motivation. It becomes the fruit. Obedience also trains discernment. Each step of obedience sharpens spiritual sensitivity. The more a person responds to God's prompting, the clearer his voice becomes. This clarity becomes essential in moments of opportunity and pressure. Wealth, influence, and responsibility introduce noise. Without a trained ear, distraction becomes danger. Obedience prepares the heart to recognize and respond to God even when distractions multiply. Another dimension of obedience is timing. Partial obedience delayed is still disobedience. God's instructions are often time-sensitive. When delayed, opportunities expire. Obedience requires urgency, not haste, but readiness. A willing heart responds quickly because it trusts God's timing more than its own comfort. This responsiveness positions a person ahead of opportunities others miss. Obedience also protects. God's instructions are not merely about progress, they are about preservation. Some paths look profitable but are spiritually costly. Obedience steers away from relationships, decisions, and opportunities that would compromise integrity. God values character over speed. He would rather slow someone down than allow them to succeed in a way that destroys them. As obedience becomes habitual, it shifts identity. A person begins to see themselves as a steward rather than an owner. Decisions are filtered through purpose rather than profit. This mindset attracts divine trust. God entrusts greater influence to those who consistently submit to his direction. Obedience proves reliability, and reliability invites responsibility. Over time, the cumulative effect of obedience becomes visible. Doors open that cannot be explained. Favor increases without manipulation. Provision flows in unexpected ways. This is not coincidence, it is consequence. Heaven responds to obedience because obedience aligns earth with divine intention. When alignment exists, resistance decreases. Obedience is not glamorous, but it is powerful. It often looks ordinary, but it produces extraordinary results. In God's system, obedience is never wasted. Every act builds spiritual capital. Every yes positions a person closer to their assignment. And when the breakthrough finally arrives, it carries P. CE, not pressure, because it was accessed through alignment rather than force. Obedience does not just lead to blessing, it sustains it. God's idea of blessing has always been larger than personal comfort. While many people pursue success as a means of ease, God views increase as a tool for influence and responsibility. When he blesses, he is not merely adding to a life, he is expanding its reach. This is why God often resists prayers that are rooted only in self-interest. Comfort has a ceiling, but impact has no limits. God invests where his purpose can flow freely. The moment a person begins to see life only through the lens of personal needs, growth becomes restricted. Survival-focused thinking narrows vision and limits faith. God challenges this perspective by inviting his people to look beyond themselves. He asks them to consider who their life can serve, what problems they can solve, and what systems they can influence. This shift is not about ambition, it is about assignment. Purpose-driven thinking attracts divine partnership. God does not release significant resources just to improve lifestyle. He releases them to expand capacity. Capacity determines how much responsibility a person can handle without losing integrity. When a person understands that blessing is connected to impact, their decisions change. They begin to think long-term instead of short-term. They invest in growth rather than indulgence. They prepare themselves to carry weight, not just enjoy reward. Impact requires vision. Vision moves beyond immediate gratification into generational thinking. God is drawn to vision that outlives a single season. When he sees someone thinking about legacy rather than luxury, trust increases. Wealth then becomes a means to empower others, create opportunities, and bring solutions where there is need. This kind of wealth carries purpose, and purpose sustains. Aims motivation, even when challenges arise. God also measures impact by influence. Influence is not about control, it is about service. The more people a life touches, the greater the responsibility attached to it. God looks for hearts that remain humble as influence grows. Pride disqualifies purpose. That is why God often delays increase until humility is secure. Influence without humility corrupts, but influence with humility transforms. Many people fear that thinking about impact means losing enjoyment. In reality, impact brings fulfillment that comfort never can. Comfort fades quickly, but purpose renews passion. God knows that a life centered on impact remains resilient during pressure. When setbacks come, purpose keeps the heart anchored. Comfort-focused success collapses under stress, but purpose-driven success endures. God also understands that impact requires structure. Systems must be built, skills must be sharpened, resources must be managed wisely. This is why God often pushes people into learning, growth, and development. Impact demands excellence. God honors excellence because it reflects stewardship. When excellence becomes a standard, influence expands naturally. Another reason God blesses for impact is multiplication. Impact creates momentum. When resources are used to serve others, they circulate rather than stagnate. God designed blessing to flow, not to sit still. Stagnant blessing breeds entitlement, but flowing blessing produces growth. God trusts those who understand movement. As this understanding settles, motives become purified. The desire to be seen is replaced by the desire to serve. Competition fades, collaboration grows. God's favor increases where ego decreases. This is where true abundance begins. Abundance is not excess. It is sufficiency with purpose. It is having enough to meet needs and enough left to make a difference. When G.O.D. blesses for impact, he ensures sustainability. Comfort-based success often creates dependence on circumstances. Impact-based success creates dependence on God. This dependency keeps the heart aligned. It ensures that success never replaces faith. God wants increase to deepen relationship, not distract from it. Understanding that God blesses for impact changes how one prays, plans, and pursues life. Requests become aligned with purpose. Effort becomes intentional. Success becomes meaningful. And when blessing comes, it feels weighty but fulfilling. It does not isolate, it connects. It does not inflate ego, it expands influence. This is the kind of blessing God releases, the kind that lifts others while advancing purpose. It is not designed to make life easier, but to make life effective. Comfort may satisfy temporarily, but impact satisfies eternally. And God always chooses eternal value over temporary pleasure. Failure has a way of intimidating the heart, but in God's design, it is never meant to define the end of a story. Many people treat failure as a verdict, assuming it disqualifies them from future success. God sees it differently. Failure is often a filter, separating intention from motive, impatience from perseverance, and pride from humility. It is not proof of defeat. It is evidence of refinement at work. When failure happens, it exposes what success hides. In seasons of progress, weaknesses are often masked by momentum, but when something falls apart, the true condition of the heart is revealed. God allows failure to surface unresolved character issues that would later sabotage greater responsibility. He is less concerned with protecting reputation than with protecting destiny. What looks like loss is often protection. Failure also confronts expectation. Many people enter pursuits with unrealistic timelines and shallow roots. When results don't accompany me as planned, discouragement follows. God uses failure to teach patience and endurance. Endurance cannot be learned through ease. It is built through resistance. Every setback strengthens spiritual muscle that comfort never could. These muscles are essential for sustaining future success. Another function of failure is redirection. Sometimes failure closes doors that were never meant to remain open. God uses collapse to reposition people into better alignment with their purpose. What feels like rejection is often correction. When paths end abruptly, God is often preventing long-term damage. Failure narrows focus, removes distractions, and clarifies calling. Failure also reshapes humility. Success can inflate ego, but failure humbles perspective. It reminds the heart of its dependence on God. Humility creates space for learning, growth, and correction. A humble heart remains teachable, and teachability attracts wisdom. God resists pride, but he elevates humility. Failure strips away false confidence and replaces it with grounded strength. There is also a deep lesson in how one responds to failure. Bitterness hardens the heart, but reflection matures it. God watches whether failure leads to blame or responsibility. Growth happens when accountability replaces excuses. Ownership of mistakes invites grace. Grace does not erase consequences, but it empowers recovery. God honors repentance with restoration. Failure trains discernment. After falling, awareness increases. Boundaries become clearer. Decisions become more intentional. God uses failure to sharpen judgment and prevent repeated errors. This discernment becomes invaluable in seasons of success when opportunities multiply and distractions increase. Failure teaches what to avoid and how to choose wisely. Failure is also a test of perseverance. Quitting is always an option, but God measures persistence. He looks for those who rise again with wisdom rather than repeating patterns. Perseverance demonstrates commitment to growth, not just to outcome. God rewards those who stay faithful to the process even when progress is slow. Importantly, failure separates identity from performance. When success disappears, identity is tested. God uses this moment to root worth in calling rather than achievement. This foundation is critical. Without it, future success becomes a source of pressure instead of peace. When identity is secure, failure becomes an experience, not a sentence. Over time, failure loses its power to intimidate. Confidence is rebuilt on wisdom rather than assumption. The fear of trying fades, replaced by resilience. God does not promise a journey without setbacks, but he promises redemption within them. Every failure, when surrendered, becomes a lesson that strengthens the future. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of its construction. It filters out shortcuts, refines intention, and builds durability. Those who embrace its lessons emerge wiser, stronger, and more aligned. God uses failure not to stop progress, but to secure it. What was once a stumbling block becomes a stepping stone when seen through the lens of purpose. Giving is one of the most misunderstood principles in the journey of faith, especially when resources feel limited. Many view generosity as something reserved for seasons of abundance, believing they will give more once they have more. God often reverses that order. He introduces giving during seasons of uncertainty, not to reduce what remains, but to reshape the heart. Giving is less about the amount released and more about the fear that is confronted in the process. Fear thrives on control. It convinces the mind that holding tightly is the safest option. When God invites a person to give in a moment of lack, he is not testing low, loyalty to money, but revealing trust in him. Giving breaks the illusion that security comes from possession. It teaches the heart that provision flows from God, not from what is stored. This lesson is foundational for anyone who will later steward abundance. In giving, the heart is retrained. Instead of reacting to scarcity, it responds with faith. This shift is powerful because fear-based decisions limit growth. A fearful heart avoids risk, resists opportunity, and shrinks vision. Generosity interrupts that pattern. It loosens the grip of anxiety and replaces it with confidence in God's faithfulness. When fear loses its hold, clarity increases and peace returns. God also uses giving to align priorities. What a person releases reveals what they value. Giving reorders affection, ensuring that money remains a servant rather than a master. When resources are given freely, they lose the power to dominate emotions. This emotional freedom is essential for handling larger responsibility. Wealth amplifies whatever controls the heart. If fear controls it, wealth magnifies insecurity. If trust controls it, wealth magnifies purpose. Giving is also a training ground for stewardship. It teaches intentionality. Generosity is not reckless, it is thoughtful. God shapes discernment through giving, helping people recognize when, where, and how to release resources. This wisdom becomes critical when managing larger amounts. A generous heart with wisdom becomes a powerful vessel for impact. Another dimension of giving is its effect on identity. A person who gives consistently begins to see themselves as a conduit rather than a container. This mindset attracts divine trust. God blesses channels, not reservoirs. When resources flow through a life, they remain in motion. Motion invites multiplication. Stagnation invites decay. Giving keeps resources alive. Giving also stretches faith beyond comfort. It challenges logic and invites obedience. In moments when giving feels unreasonable, faith is activated. These moments build spiritual confidence. Each act of generosity becomes a reminder of God's past faithfulness. Over time, fear weakens as trust strengthens. The heart learns that it can give and still be sustained. God observes how people give under pressure. He watches whether generosity remains consistent or conditional. Consistency signals maturity. It shows that faith is not dependent on circumstances. God entrusts greater resources to those whose generosity does not fluctuate with convenience. This consistency ensures that abundance will not distort priorities. Giving also opens the heart to compassion. It connects the giver to needs beyond themselves. This awareness deepens humility and gratitude. Wealth without compassion becomes isolation, but generosity keeps the heart connected to humanity. God desires abundance that remains relational, not detached. Over time, giving produces internal security. Security no longer comes from accumulation, but from trust. This security stabilizes decision-making. It prevents panic in uncertainty and pride in success. When the heart is secure, wisdom guides action. God values this stability because it sustains long-term influence. Giving does not manipulate God, nor does it guarantee immediate return. Its greatest reward is transformation. A transformed heart becomes a safe place for blessing to dwell. God releases more into lives where fear has been displaced by trust. When fear is broken, capacity increases, and when capacity increases, provision follows. In this way, giving becomes more than action, it becomes a declaration. It declares that God is faithful, that fear is not in control, and that trust governs the heart. This declaration prepares a person to steward abundance without being enslaved by it. God releases wealth where trust has already been proven. Environment quietly shapes destiny long before results become visible. The voices a person listens to, the conversations they entertain, and the standards they tolerate all influence the direction of their life. God understands this deeply, which is why he is intentional about environment when preparing someone for increase. Growth is rarely hindered by lack of ability. It is more often limited by surrounding influence. Environment can either reinforce fear or cultivate faith. God often begins elevation by initiating separation. This separation is not punishment. It is protection. Certain relationships are comfortable but limiting. They reinforce old thinking and discourage change. When God begins to stretch vision, familiar voices may resist because growth disrupts shared comfort zones. God gently and sometimes firmly removes these influences to create space for expansion. This process can feel lonely, but it is purposeful. As separation occurs, exposure increases. God introduces new conversations, new perspectives, and new standards. These environments challenge assumptions and expand expectations. Being around people who think differently forces growth. It reveals gaps in understanding and invites learning. God uses these moments to stretch capacity. Discomfort becomes a sign of development rather than failure. Environment also affects belief systems. Faith grows when it is reinforced. When surrounded by doubt, belief weakens. God places people in environments where faith is normalized, where obedience is celebrated, and where growth is expected. In these spaces, thinking shifts naturally. Possibility replaces limitation. Vision becomes contagious. What once seemed impossible begins to feel attainable. God also uses environment to refine character. New spaces reveal untested weaknesses. Pride, insecurity and fear surface when placed among stronger voices. This exposure is intentional. God uses it to build humility and teachability. A teachable spirit thrives in growth environments. Resistance isolates, but humility integrates. Integration leads to influence. Environment determines acceleration. The right environment compresses time. Lessons that would take years to learn alone are absorbed quickly through observation and mentorship. God understands that wisdom is transferable. Proximity to growth accelerates transformation. This is why God aligns people with mentors, leaders, and peers who carry the standards required for the next level. At the same time, God removes environments that breed stagnation. Comfort zones feel safe, but restrict movement. God disrupts comfort to provoke growth. This disruption may feel inconvenient, but it is necessary. Remaining in the wrong environment can slowly dilute calling. God would rather disrupt peace temporarily than allow purpose to be permanently diminished. Environment also influences discipline. Standards rise when surroundings demand excellence. God places people in environments where mediocrity is not tolerated. This pressure is healthy. It sharpens skills, strengthens resolve, and builds resilience. Under these conditions, potential becomes performance. God values environments that call out the best rather than excuse the least. As environment changes, identity evolves. A person begins to see themselves differently. New expectations challenge old labels. Confidence grows not from comparison, but from competence. God uses environment to affirm calling by placing people where their gifts are required. Being needed reinforces purpose. However, environment alone is not enough. Response matters. God watches how individuals engage new spaces. Do they learn or resist? Do they adapt or withdraw? Growth environment. GS rewards humility. Those who remain open experience acceleration. Those who cling to old identities stagnate. God honors those willing to evolve. Eventually, environment becomes a multiplier. What a person carries internally is amplified externally. A renewed mind in a supportive environment produces rapid growth. Conversely, an unprepared heart in a growth environment experiences overwhelm. God ensures readiness before exposure. He aligns timing so that environment enhances rather than harms. Understanding the power of environment changes perspective. It reframes separation as preparation and discomfort as development. God uses environment strategically to shape destiny. He removes, replaces, and realigns surroundings to ensure growth is sustained. The right environment does not merely support success, it accelerates it. And when God is the architect of environment, progress becomes inevitable. Explain 8 keynote into 800 words and don't add subheading. Many people believe failure is the ultimate test of character, but success often reveals far more. When things are going wrong, humility comes naturally. Dependence on God feels urgent. But when doors open, influence increases and recognition grows, the heart is tested in quieter, more dangerous ways. Success has the power to subtly shift trust, redirect focus, and inflate self-reliance. God understands this, which is why he watches character closely during seasons of advancement. Success introduces options. With options comes choice, and with choice comes responsibility. How a person chooses when pressure is removed reveals their true foundation. God observes whether discipline remains when oversight decreases, whether integrity stands when compromise would be profitable, and whether humility survives when affirmation multiplies. These tests are not dramatic, but they are decisive. One of the first dangers of success is misplaced confidence. Achievement can create the illusion of self-sufficiency. The mind begins to credit strategy, effort, or intelligence while quietly minimizing divine grace. God allows success to reveal this shift so it can be corrected. He is not threatened by confidence, but he resists pride. Confidence anchored in God produces peace. Confidence rooted in self eventually produces pressure. Success also tests relationships. Influence changes dynamics. How a person treats others when status increases matters deeply to God. Respect shown to those who can offer nothing in return is a sign of maturity. God measures leadership not by authority, but by service. Success that elevates ego but diminishes compassion disqualifies longevity. Another test of success is consistency. In early stages, hunger drives effort. Discipline is fueled by desire. But as goals are achieved, that hunger can fade. God watches whether consistency remains when urgency disappears. Faithfulness in success proves that obedience was never transactional. It shows that values are internal, not situational. Success also introduces visibility. Visibility magnifies both strengths and weaknesses. Decisions carry greater weight. Influence amplifies impact. God tests whether a person remains careful with words, choices, and attitudes. Wisdom becomes essential. Without it, success becomes a platform for mistakes rather than ministry. God also tests dependence during success. Prayer can become optional when things are going well. Seeking God can shift from necessity to routine. God watches whether intimacy deepens or declines with success. He desires relationship, not replacement. Success should lead to gratitude, not distance. When dependence remains, success becomes sustainable. Another challenge of success is comparison. Exposure to higher levels can awaken insecurity or competition. God, test whether identity remains secure or becomes performance-driven. Secure identity fosters collaboration. Insecure identity breeds rivalry. God entrusts greater influence to those who celebrate others rather than compete with them. Success also tests generosity. With increase comes opportunity to bless. God observes whether generosity expands or contracts. A generous heart in success reflects trust. A closed heart reveals fear of loss. God releases more where generosity grows because generosity proves stewardship. The quiet nature of these tests makes them dangerous. There is no crisis to force reflection. Comfort can dull awareness. That is why God often sends gentle corrections, subtle checks in the spirit, quiet convictions. Those who respond remain aligned. Those who ignore drift slowly. God values character over achievement because character sustains what achievement creates. Talent opens doors, but character keeps them open. Influence attracts attention, but integrity builds trust. God ensures that success never outruns character because imbalance leads to collapse. Understanding that success tests character changes perspective. It invites vigilance rather than relaxation. It encourages humility over entitlement. It reminds the heart that promotion does not remove the need for obedience. It increases it. When character remains intact, success becomes a platform for purpose rather than a threat to faith. God promotes those who pass the test of success because they have proven they can carry influence without losing integrity. In their lives, success does not replace God, it reflects Him. Before God ever changes what a person has, He commits Himself to changing who that person is. This principle is at the core of lasting transformation. Many people pursue external change, more money, more influence, more opportunity, while resisting internal change. God, RK is in the opposite order. He knows that possessions magnify the person carrying them. If character is undeveloped, abundance becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Inner transformation is not immediate, it is intentional. God reshapes desires, disciplines emotions, and refines motives. He addresses pride before promotion, insecurity before influence, and fear before freedom. This inner work often happens quietly, without applause or recognition. Yet it is the most important phase because it determines sustainability. Without transformation, success becomes temporary and unstable. God changes perspective first. How a person views money, power, and purpose determines how they will handle them. When money is seen as identity, it controls behavior. When it is seen as a tool, it serves purpose. God shifts this perspective so that resources never replace relationship. This shift frees the heart from pressure and positions it for peace. Transformation also involves discipline. God builds habits that support growth, consistency, patience, integrity. These habits are forged long before reward appears. Discipline trains the soul to operate steadily regardless of circumstances. Without discipline, abundance leads to excess. With discipline, abundance leads to impact. God also transforms the way a person responds to pressure. Emotional maturity becomes essential as responsibility increases. God teaches restraint, wisdom, and self-control. These qualities protect against impulsive decisions that can undo years of progress. Emotional strength ensures that success does not control reactions. Identity is another area God reshapes. He separates worth from achievement. When identity is rooted in Him, success cannot inflate ego and failure cannot destroy confidence. This stability allows a person to lead without fear and serve without insecurity. God trusts those whose identity is anchored. Transformation also realigns priorities. God ensures that purpose remains central. Wealth, influence, and recognition become secondary to obedience. When priorities are clear, decisions become easier. Distractions lose power. Focus sharpens. God blesses clarity. As transformation deepens, trust grows. God entrusts more because He sees readiness. Increase becomes a response to maturity, not a test of it. When inner growth matches outer opportunity, success feels natural rather than overwhelming. This is why God's blessings last. They are built on transformed lives. What He gives does not destroy because who the person has become can sustain it. God's goal is not just to bless, but to preserve. And preservation begins within. When God changes who you are, what you have eventually follows. And when it does, it stays. If this message has spoken to you, stirred your faith, or challenged your perspective, don't let it end here. Stay connected because every message is designed to build you, stretch you, and prepare you for what God is doing next in your life. Subscribe to this channel for more faith-filled teachings that align purpose with growth and truth with transformation. Share this message with someone who needs encouragement today and allow these words to become seeds of change. What God is building in you matters, and this journey is just beginning.